Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Stud.
And I'm Ron Stud.
And Ron, tonight for episode 38, we have Mr. James Tehrani here. How you doing tonight, sir?
Great. I'm ready for this 38 special here.
Oh, yeah, 38 special. I like that. Well, before we get going, before we get into the Ember Round, Ron and I always like to pay homage to you, the guest, and to our official beverage sponsor, Malort. So cheers to you, James. Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest, and thank you, Malort, for being our official spirit, our official sponsor of season 2. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. I have a confession. I've never actually tried Malort. Should I try it?
Yes.
How many years have you been living in the greater Chicago area?
My whole life.
Yes. After we're done recording, go out and get a bottle. It's an experience.
Note with Alex has told us if you buy a case at a time, you might get some weird looks, but a bottle, probably not so much.
Yeah, on occasion, James, I do buy cases of it, and it's more economical that way, and people usually think that's very strange.
It is, because I've never heard good things. Just kidding. You can edit that out.
No,
that's fair.
Listen, the great people of Malort embrace the wide range of appreciation and lack thereof. So,
all right, one day I'm going to try it, I promise.
Let me know when you do. Maybe I can join you for it.
Definitely.
So kicking us off, though, and we have our Ember Round, how do you know Alex or I?
Who are you guys? I thought this was, WTF with Mark Maron? What am I doing here?
I think you're on the wrong show. Nah.
Oh, man. Well, I used to work with Alex at my previous job, Sphera. I was on the marketing team. Alex is on the marketing team, and we marketed together. And we did some good stuff together.
That's the best way to put it. We marketed together.
Yeah, we went to market. You don't hear people say that in marketing, that we went to market. Well, I guess you do, but not like we went to market.
Right. And we did that, and it was funny. You'd been there for quite some time. I just showed up in September. So it was sort of two ships crossing in the night. But that period of time was great, and
it was
really
magic.
Appreciated working with you. That's right. That's right.
We did some good things. It was fun.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit about you in more detail, right? What's your story? What are your hobbies? What are your interests?
My hobbies and interests. Well, if you can see behind me, there's a lot of comedians back there. Mm-hmm. I'm really into old comedians and old comedy. That's part of my interest. I also am into bass guitar. Play a little bass since high school.
Do you slap the bass?
I do a little slapping of the bass. I don't know if you can hear it too well, but...
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of hard to do
Ron,
when it's that close up.
I think we got our new official theme song. We're just going to loop that.
Yes.
That 2-second clip.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awful. Don't do that.
So what are you currently... Oh, sorry, go on.
So I lived in the Chicago area. I have my whole life. I live here with my wife and my 2 kids. Well, my daughter's in college now, but two kids and my dog Oreo. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about Oreo a little bit later, right?
Oreo is the perfect name for a pet.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I didn't know that was the name of your pet because Ron and I had a cat, Oreo, when we were children, and Oreo thought he was a dog.
Totally.
Yeah, and that actually, Oreo was this. Ron, you were older than me. You remember Oreo more than me, but Oreo was this outdoor cat who wanted nothing.
He was a tomcat,
indoor.
Really.
And we lived behind, or I should say, in front of train tracks, and Oreo would go up to the train tracks. Keep in mind, didn't have claws, right? It was the clawed and all that, but would go up there and find snakes and little rats and stuff and bring them back into the house. It's like, hey, look what I did.
And you're like, thanks, Oreo.
Right. And then the sad tragic part, Ron, do you want to tell it or do you want me to tell
Well, I want to put one more fun thing with it. So he was also a scrapper. So he would get into fights probably once a week or so. And I think part of it was just like, he would just kind of like eye up other dogs, like full-size dogs. Like, I think there was a German Shepherd that was like, you know, and no, I think there was a Rottweiler actually. Yeah, I think there was a Rottweiler that was probably 2 to 3 times its size. And he would just like get into fights with them, and he'd come back all bloodied. And there was like one night I remember that my mom said that a neighbor said they thought that they heard a little girl crying, and it was Oreo. He came back from a fight. He was all bloodied up, and it was funny because when we'd walk him around or whatever, he would just like look at the other dogs and would just kind of like do that kind of thing.
I can't vouch for the Rottweiler thing. Ron, you're 8 years older, so you have a better memory than me. But I will say this: Oreo walked us to school every day.
What?
It was really unusual.
You had a cat walk you to school?
Yeah,
walked us to school, and it would wait like right outside the school, make sure we went in, and then it would go on its way.
Well, not quite. So to correct that, there was an underpass that he would walk us to, where there was a crossing guard. Where there's a crossing guard, and at that point, he was more or less like, all right, off we would go, and off he would go to try to find food that other people in the neighborhood would put out for him so that he could come home and put his nose up to whatever my parents wanted to buy him. So.
All right, I'm going to send you a picture of my Oreo, and you're going to put a picture of your Oreo next to it when this goes out so we can see the Oreos and compare the differences.
I'll work on that.
I like that. Our Oreo had an unfortunate, tragic end, though.
Yeah.
My first experience with loss.
Oh, no.
But it's a significant. I mean, it's a memorable story. Ron, do you want to tell it?
Sure. So we had a neighbor who unfortunately had Alzheimer's, and she, for whatever reason, didn't particularly care for cats. So she ended up, I think, putting out antifreeze, unfortunately, and we found him kind of passed out in her yard.
Stiff as a board.
Yeah. And at the time, my dad was out of town, and I was the oldest in the family of the kids, so I kind of had to do the burial. And
you had to
I had no clue what I was doing.
You had to dig a hole like a ditch, and then you threw Oreo in like stiff, right? And Kate, our sister, like freaked out.
How dare you? She's like,
you got to throw it in something first. So when you put it in a garbage bag, like somehow that was better.
I mean, what else was I gonna do? But
man, this is turning out to be the most depressing between two studs ever.
But
you just waited for me to talk about anti-freezing cats.
I mean, there's a really, really happy story though with Oreo, and that happy story just to show he was really odd. Like, you know how some pets are really smart and some just not so much. Here's how smart this cat was. So I want to say at one point, and it wasn't uncommon for this cat to kind of go off on little journeys. You know, I have no clue what he did. But he definitely had fun wherever he was going.
Well, a lot of the neighbors knew Oreo.
They knew
always leave food out, so he would just go up and down the neighborhood.
So he'd be fine, gone for a day or two. You're just like, he's out there. Who knows what he's doing? Maybe he got into a scrap. I'm sure he's fine. And a week goes by and we didn't see him. We're like, well, that's a little bit weird. Anyway, after a week, we started going around to the neighbors and said, hey, we're trying to find our cat. Have you seen him? No clue where he's at. If you see him, will you let us know? And the next day, or it was like maybe a day or two later, our one neighbor, she's out at a restaurant in downtown in the city we grew up in. And it was probably, I don't know, maybe 2-3 miles away. So it was a bit of a distance. And she came out from a restaurant, and she said she saw the cat just staring at her up from her car because it recognized her car. And she's like, I don't know if that's it or not, but what the hell? I'll take it home. So sure enough, she brought it home, and it was our cat. So he had recognized her car and the scent or whatever, and that's how he found his way back.
That's a pretty positive story when we lost Oreo for a couple weeks. That was the uplifting part to end the story.
I mean, he came back, which was kind of funny. Like
he got an Uber ride back. He didn't just get a ride; he got an Uber back.
And not only that, but he kind of like gave the neighbor the stink eye, like, "You're taking me home, you know that, right?" And she was just like, "I guess."
I'm gonna make you an offer you can't refuse. You're gonna take me back to the stud place.
So yes, we will absolutely in the Instagram. We're gonna have to have a picture of both of the Oreos.
Your Oreo and our Oreo.
We're
So my
definitely doing that.
Oreo
And
is really smart too. He's like when I
Nice.
was getting him trained when he was little, the trainer's like,
Yeah.
he's like 98 percentile. He's amazing. I'm like, oh, he's really smart. So
Yeah.
he's like my buddy. Like I'll be walking and people will say, "Hey, Oreo," and I have no idea who they are, but he's got like this rep in the neighborhood, I guess, because I'm taking him on walks and we do this litter challenge and all kinds of good things.
That's cool. That's cool. And we're gonna touch on that litter challenge a little bit later. But let's keep moving for now. We got more to cover before we get out of the Ember round. You're still in the Ember round, James.
Oh,
So I know you haven't escaped yet.
do you see I'm sweating?
Well, I've got an idea on something you can do about the sweating. I think you need a drink, right? And you've got
Ooh.
something to drink, don't you? Right?
Cheers to
Now,
Malort.
what are you drinking?
What are you
sir?
working on?
Oh, well, I have a Cabernet, and when my wife opened the bottle, I was like, which bottle did you open? And it was Ménage à Trois. So I'm drinking Ménage à Trois Cabernet.
Between two studs.
Perfect.
Hopefully not, but
I love it.
Ron, what are you working on?
I'm having water again. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, Ron's doing this cleanse
This
thing. We've
fitness
heard all
challenge
about
thing.
it. Excited to be done with it. Hopefully, this is the last episode with you still on it. But
This Friday is the end of it, so I'm thrilled.
I am working on. So I try, James, to, if I can, I want to have a connection between what I'm working on, what I'm drinking that night, and the guest. And this one was difficult, but I'm kind of cheating. You'll see. So when we were still working together, there's this big event at the beginning of the year in January called Sales Kickoff, where everyone gets together, and for us, it's a global company.
it's like the kicking machine where you go down and everybody kicks you, right?
That's exactly right. So I was hanging out with two of our Scottish employees, and before they left, because they were going to, it was the end of the week, they're going back to Scotland, and they said, Alex, I know you live locally. Do you want to have some of our leftover scotch that we're not going to take back to Scotland with us? And so that is what I'm working on. I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but Tan Navalin. Pretty good, actually. But the connection, of course,
Move the label
is,
over a little bit more.
There
There
you
you go. Yep.
I have never heard of that. Is it good?
Looks good though.
It is actually very good. Very good. So thank you. I'm not going to say their names, but thank you, Scottish coworkers. And that's my connection, because James and I are still working together at that time. So there you go.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, in a roundabout way, it's just aligned perfectly.
I feel it. I feel it. I mean, I get it.
Speaking of roundabout, trying to make connections, this next question we always try to connect the dots with. Because we get really interesting answers and responses. Pick a piece of art, and art can mean anything to you. And tell us how it represents or speaks to you. We always get that. We always find that to be a really interesting question.
That was actually a lot harder than it sounds, because there's so many things. As I'm a writer, I'm an editor, and there's so many things that have influenced me from the arts. But the thing I decided to pull out is
he brought it with him.
my wall album, which I got in high school. You can still see cool
It's
pictures.
Pink Floyd, 1979, The Wall.
Yes.
That is awesome.
So I got this in high school. At the time, I was at a record store, and they were phasing out records, and they were going to these great little discs called CDs. Kids, we used CDs in the 90s. But I still had a record player, and there was only a few albums left in the store, and one of them was Pink Floyd, The Wall. So I'm like, I don't know how much it cost at the time, maybe $10, something like that. I'm like, this looks interesting. I'm going to give it a shot. I think I might have heard Another Brick in the Wall at that point. I wasn't really familiar with Pink Floyd, so I put the record on, and I was just my eyes bulged out of my head. I'm like, this is from the gods. This is amazing. I mean, I listened to the whole thing probably 3, 4 times that day. I was so interested in it,
Wow.
and I became a huge Roger Waters fan, and that's why I picked up bass guitar because I wanted to be a songwriter, and so it was a big influence on me, and it still is.
Wow. Do you, not to get too personal, but do you relate to Pink, the character in The Wall?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think everybody can relate to Pink in some ways. I mean, we all go through things that we're not expecting, difficulties, hardships, and how you deal with it is how you get through life. And Pink didn't do a great job with that.
Yeah.
But he was judged and he was found guilty, wasn't he?
He was by the judge. Have you seen the accompanying movie that was made? I think it was 1980. It was like maybe a year after
Oh yeah.
the album. Do you find that to be equally powerful or less so?
You mean the Wall movie? Or
Yeah.
which movie?
Yeah.
With the animations and that.
Yeah, the Wall
Yeah.
movie. I mean, I don't know when I saw it for the first time. It must have been in high school as well. I used to watch it all the time, and I haven't watched it in probably 5, 6 years at this point. But um, it was really meaningful to me, and even in high school, we used to go see Rocky Horror, like on a Saturday
Mm,
night. And before the
Nice.
movie started, they'd show some previews, and one of them was always the Wall, and we'd all go around and go like this and walk around doing that. Um, yeah,
that
it
part of the
was.
movie always scared the crap out of me. Like when I was like
Yeah.
a teenager watching that,
It
that's
wasn't
scary.
the kids being turned into sausages that didn't scare you.
That that scared me a little bit. Actually, that whole movie. Now that I think about it, I haven't seen that movie in years either. That whole movie is pretty
There's a
terrible.
lot. There's a
little
lot of
dark,
depth
yeah.
to it. Yeah. But no, I know.
Well,
Alex
it's
and I,
interesting.
we went to go see Roger Waters perform The Wall live in Philadelphia, and that was really a great experience.
That must have been around 2010 or 2011. And I always
Somewhere
tell
around there.
people, when people ask you like, what was the best concert you've ever seen? I always go, well, I don't know if I'd call it a concert. To me, it was more of a show.
Right.
But Roger Waters, The Wall. I mean,
Yeah, I saw it at the United Center. I've seen Roger, I think 4 times now, and I mean that was an amazing. The first time I saw Roger was definitely the best, but The Wall was, I mean, just seeing it live was incredible.
well, I'll say this: by the time Ron and I saw him, it might have been 2012. I'm not sure, but when we saw him, you could tell he had some help with the lead vocals. He was
His voice is going a little bit, yeah.
His voice
Yeah.
was. I think, if I remember correctly, he was actually accompanied by himself on certain songs from like the late
Younger
70s,
Rogers,
early 80s. Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
old
Yeah.
Roger and young Roger together.
Yeah,
That's
I've
the group
seen
that just-
Roger 4 times, and then I've seen David twice, and I went to see Nick Mason's tour when he came here. Is it last year, I think? The Saucer Full of Secrets tour. That was
Mhm.
really cool because they played the really old Pink Floyd that most people don't know.
Yeah.
So that was really
Yeah, the
interesting.
early stuff.
The real early stuff, yeah, like the Sid Barrett years, that kind of thing.
Well, and I was actually going to bring up Sid Barrett. This is something I've never confessed to publicly, but I'm going to tonight because we're talking about Sid Barrett and Pink Floyd. This is a true story, and it actually was. It scared the living shit out of me when I was a young teenager. I remember really getting into music right in my early high school years, and part of that was going through the Beatles and then kind of graduating into the Stones and then graduating into Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. It was right during that era that I really started like wanting to backtrack into the early Pink Floyd stuff, which was the Sid Barrett era, the original lead singer and original lead guitarist. And the story with him, for those who don't know, is I think a lot of people think he was actually schizophrenic, but he got messed up on drugs and
Yeah,
it's a
lots
really
of-
sad story where he more or less got kind of pushed to the side, and the band was like, "We got to move on without you," and Pink Floyd became what we now know today as Pink Floyd. Anyway, I was chatting with a friend. I was in early high school. I was chatting with a friend, and we were talking about music, and we were talking about Pink Floyd. We talked about Sid Barrett, and I said, yeah, it's pretty crazy how everything happened, and somehow I alluded to the fact that he was still alive. And my buddy was like, "Why are you saying it in present tense? Like he clearly died. Like he died years ago." And this was before smartphones, right? And we were outside playing, and we were like, "Well, like we're just gonna look this up on the computer later, but why don't make a bet out of this? I bet you he's still alive." I said that, and he's like, "I bet you he's dead." So I went home, and I was like, "I think he's still alive. I think he's still alive." I went home, he's alive. The next morning, before I hung out with that guy, breaking news: Sid Barrett dead.
What?
And that's a true story. And I remember thinking to myself, "Oh my God, this bet between me and my friend, like, did we kill Sid Barrett?" Moral of the story is we called a truce. We were talking about, like, did I win? Because when we made the bet, he was alive. We just said, that's bad juju. Just,
That's
call it a
bad
day.
juju right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I may
Wow.
have, I'm confessing tonight, I may have inadvertently, accidentally killed Sid Barrett.
Wow. I was not expecting this confession right here. That was not what I was expecting from this podcast. Sid, if
I
you're
was-
listening and you're doing what you usually do, I mean, I had nothing to do with it.
Please forgive Alex, though.
It was
he
all
knows
Alex.
not what he did.
I must have been like 13 or 14. It was kind of freaky. So.
Well,
Yeah.
in college, I remember Sam Kinison came to our school, and I really, really wanted to go to it, but I mean, the guy was hilarious, and I had a test, I think, the next day, so I'm like, I'm gonna miss this one. I'm gonna go study for my test, and like a week or two later, dies in the car accident. I didn't wish it on him like you did, but it was.
But you missed your
I missed
opportunity.
my opportunity.
Yeah. I
So-
certainly have that bucket list of, like, everyone always says, "Oh, who are the artists you want to see before you die?" I have a separate list of people I want to see before they die, and that list is quickly, sadly, dwindling. On to happier news. Last question of the Ember Round. It sounds like a negative question, but we like to have the positive spin on it, which is obviously everyone has been impacted by COVID. Crossing our fingers, we're out of the worst part of the storm, but it's impacted everyone on planet Earth. But there's been some positive things that have come from it as well. Ron and I started this podcast for us. What is something, James, that you look back on that maybe has been beneficial, positive for you?
Without a doubt, and COVID has been terrible, and it's been hard, and it's changed everyone's lives to some degree. But the best thing that came out of COVID, I would say, is my brother has always really wanted to start his own tech company. He's an engineer, and he was riding around with his daughter, my niece, and they were talking about the troubles like young dancers have, and his brain started turning and saying, well, what if there was like technology that could help you learn to dance? And he started this company called Dance Technologies, and I came on as kind of like a consultant for I call myself the content dude, so I help him with some content here and there, newsletters and things like that. And lo and behold, yesterday actually it debuted, so there's an app out
Whoa.
now, and really excited for him. And he did it as a white label so that he can turn into other things besides dance. So like he can, if you name a different like say gymnastics or something like that, it could potentially be used to help people learn gymnastics because it's unbiased information. Like imagine you're in a classroom where you have 15, 20 dancers. a teacher can only see so much. They can't see every movement, but this app focused on one student, you can really point out the parts of their dance routine that need work. And I thought it was a great idea, and I don't know if it would have happened if COVID didn't happen, because it gave him some time at home to really think about it and then bring me in and some other people. And I'm really happy and proud of him. And he's my twin brother, by the way.
Oh, cool.
That's cool. Wait, so how does I know this is brand new, but how does it, in terms of like, is it like a step-by-step through the app about like the different positions? Like, how does that work?
So it takes different dance techniques. I'm not a dancer. I can't tell you what's a dance technique.
Yeah.
And then it gives you an example from a professional of what the dance move should look like. And then you can record yourself and then try and match up with what the professional is doing. And then it'll show like red dots on your body for the places that you're out of alignment, and then green dots for where you're in alignment. And there's 33 different places. So it's pretty cool. And the fact that my brother started this whole tech company, it's just like mind-blowing to me. And I'm really proud.
Yeah, as you should be, and proud of yourself too for the work that you've helped out with. So I want to make sure that we promote this, and we will in our Instagram post. But is this something that I could go on with my iPhone or my Android phone, and I could download the app today? Like, what's the?
Yeah, it's there's some that are free, and there's some that of the more advanced dances that you need to pay a subscription price for. But anybody can try it.
That's super cool. Well, we will absolutely link to that in the episode. That's really cool. You and your brother, I know you're giving your brother all the credit, but you and your brother, and I'm probably sure others, helped in being entrepreneurial.
He built a really great team of people who really know their stuff, a lot smarter on technology than I am. And I'm just here with the words because I'm the content dude,
Love it. Well, listen, James, with that, you have officially graduated from the Embers.
Man, I thought it would never end.
You did it.
Truthfully, too, like, I can go down a Pink Floyd rat hole for we could probably do a whole episode just on Pink Floyd, just on the wall. Heck.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we could totally do that.
We'll have to bring it back. We got We got stuff to talk about, James, but maybe we'll have to have you back and go down a dark, dark rabbit hole all about Pink Floyd.
That would be fun.
That would be cool.
Yeah. So you are officially out of the rabbit hole, or I should say, you're officially out of the emerald.
Yep.
So let's kind of dig into. You mentioned it earlier.
Did Oreo catch that rabbit, by the way?
Probably.
Several.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably went down in the hole. Bugs Bunny like.
Exactly. Right. So you'd mentioned, and you've alluded to it earlier. You're a content guy, and in fact, some might even call you a word grinder. Can you explain what that means and kind of what's the origin for this fascination?
So when I came to Sphera, I had a manager. His name's Keith, and I was cranking out a lot of content because when Sphera was formed, we were, as you know, but they might not know, it was carved out from a larger organization. So when I got there, there was really no content at all. So I just kind of said, all right, let's see what we can do. Wrote blog posts, did newsletters, all kinds of good stuff. And one day Keith just goes, "You're really a word grinder, aren't you?" And I was like, I'd never heard it before, but I'm like, I kind of like it. So that's what I do. Is I just crank out those words and like a organ grinder. And that's where the word grinder came from. And I added it to my LinkedIn profile because I thought it was funny.
And it's creative, right? It shows you've got good use of language and you can put those words together, and why not?
Yeah, I write's good. Sometimes.
Love it. So I know that sustainability, Alex mentioned, and I know even prior to the episode we were talking a little bit. Sustainability is something that that really is a big part of your life, and you mentioned in our pre-show a little bit about this litter challenge. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, so again, another Sphera story. At Sphera, every year they do a sustainability day. They didn't do it in person for a while because of COVID, but I think this must have been, was it 2019? I want to say it was like end of summer, beginning of fall 2019. For Sustainability Day, the Chicago office went to Oak Street Beach and just did a cleanup. We walked around. They gave us gloves, and we tried to clean up all the litter we could. And yes, there's some gross things sometimes, but I really enjoyed it. And then after I got back, I started like thinking in my head, what if everybody just picked up one piece of litter a day? I mean, just imagine how much cleaner the world would be if everybody just picked up one piece of litter a day. So I think that was right before I went to a conference in Cleveland. So I did some litter pickup in Cleveland, and I picked one up.
Probably a
one
lot
piece.
to do there. I'm just kidding. I'm not knocking on Cleveland. I actually
It was
love
actually
Cleveland, but I think of when the river caught on fire. I know that's a low blow. It's a low blow. Sorry.
I tell you though, Cleveland was a lot cleaner, like in the downtown, than I was expecting. But I'd find a piece of litter, I'd take a picture of it and post it on Twitter, and then when I got home, I'm like, my dog Oreo should do this too. So he comes along with me on most of my walks, and we'll find at least one piece of litter, pick it up, and I'll post it on Twitter. And I want to say I'm on day 920-ish. So for 920 days, I picked up at least one piece of litter and I'm hoping that eventually it catches on where everybody says, you know what, I can do one thing a day to make the world a better place, and just pick up a piece of litter. And just imagine if 1% of the population picked up one thing a day, how much cleaner the world would be. I'm not saying we're going to eliminate the problems, because there's a lot of waste out there, but it's a start, and that's why I did it. And I found actually there's this whole community of people on Twitter that pick up litter, and it's kind of cool, like to interact with people in England and Europe, and they're picking up litter, and they're obviously much more advanced in terms of sustainability in Europe than they are in the US. So it's pretty neat.
I've heard of something sort of similar. Have you heard of plogging?
Plogging, no.
So it's the same idea, except you pick up litter while you're jogging. And especially for like group runs, they'll kind of say like, hey, let's go to this park or whatever. And then as that whole group is running through, people are just picking up pieces of litter while they do it. And it helps with just, as you go through, you're cleaning up the community very quickly, especially when you're working as a group.
Jogging sounds like a lot of exercise, but yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. But no, I love that idea too. And 960 days, congratulations. That's awesome.
I was going to say, 960 days, have you even thought for a moment how many pounds of garbage you've probably picked up?
I think it's 920, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot. And like for World Cleanup Day, I do at least an hour cleanup in the neighborhood where I go around with a big garbage bag and just pick up as much stuff as I can in an hour. And I live in a pretty clean community, but it's amazing how much litter is even in a clean community. You find so many interesting things.
Well, so I was going to say, James, I want to go to break, but before we do, I'm actually really curious for the people listening. I feel like there's a lot of people, especially in the younger generations, who say, I want to do something, but they feel kind of helpless. Like they don't know really where to start. They see the rising sea levels, warming of the earth, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. I know you're not a sustainability expert, but you're clearly doing something. Can you maybe give some ideas or thoughts that you're doing, like what you just mentioned, that if everyone does it, like you said, 1%, it can have a big impact?
Well, get a dog named Oreo. Get it, put a leash on a harness, I prefer a harness, and walk around your area and look at where the trash is. And then once you start doing it, you start thinking to yourself, this is gross. Why are we doing this to our own planet? We only have one planet. I mean, we're not moving to Mars anytime soon. And I don't even know if I would want to move to Mars, even if I could. There's a beautiful Earth here. And like when I talked to Robert Ballard, like the explorer, I interviewed him on a podcast, which is really cool. And he basically said to me, like he's a explorer. He found the Titanic. I mean, the world is talking to us and telling us that it's not happy with us. And you just have to open your eyes a little bit and see what you can do to make a change. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not a sustainability expert, but there's little things that everybody can do that can change the world. I know I was talking to you, Alex, and you mentioned like thinking about how much meat you eat in a week. I'm not telling you what to eat. That's not my gig. I'm not here to preach to people.
I told you, and I get inspired by people like you, where I can say, maybe I only have a beef one day a week. I love beef, right? Like if I could, I'd eat beef every day. And quite frankly, I probably used to almost every day. But I realize how much worse beef is for society, the carbon emissions, even compared to chicken. And so like, I think there are a lot of people who go, oh, well, I know I can't give up all beef I can't give up all meat. So I'm just not going to try. It's like, yeah, but the difference between eating beef 4 times a week and 1 time a week, you can still have it. You don't have to become a vegan, but just doing little things here and there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you go to Starbucks and you get your coffee and you get the little plastic cup. I mean, the plastic isn't great, but go home, wash it out, and recycle it. Mm-hmm. Take 30 seconds to wash it out and recycle it, and you're making a little difference. So I think we can all make a little difference.
So quick question before we cut to break. When it comes to picking up litter, I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like there was some degree of, don't touch that. You don't know where it's been. Do you have to wear gloves, or is it just like there is a certain degree of, you know what, everything's pretty filthy, just pick it up and wash your hands later when you get home? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. Okay, so this is actually a pretty funny story. So I used to use my hands, and I'd find something, and I'd pick it up. And then one day, I was having a hard time finding a piece of litter for my litter challenge. It was cold out, and it was early on in COVID. So I went to this field near my house, and there was this piece of litter in the middle of it. So I'm like, oh, finally I found, because, if you start a challenge like this, and there's days when you have you have like a lot of snow or something, and it's hard to find litter, your anxiety builds because you don't want to lose your challenge. I mean, your streak. So
Especially if you get that momentum, yeah.
So I find this box in the middle of the field, and again, this was early during COVID, and I pick it up, and I turn it around, and it's a nasal spray. And this was before vaccines. This is before we really knew how it was transmitted. And I'm like, what do I do? I've touched something that's probably got COVID on it.
Oh, so my God.
I'm holding this box kind of like this away from me, scared to death of what's in my hand. But I'm like, I can't drop it. I got to at least throw it out. So there's a garbage that was maybe 150 yards or so away. So I'm walking like Frankenstein with this box in front of me, and I finally drop it in, and then I'm like, Oreo, we got to go home. We got to go home. So I don't think poor Oreo was able to do his business. I had to go home, wash my hands for 3 minutes, and get it all off. And then after that, I realized doggy poop bags. Why not put that on my hand to pick up the litter? So I'm always carrying a doggy poop bag with me to pick up litter.
Love that. Everyone always carry doggy poop bags with you. Never know when you can pick up some litter.
That's right.
And with that, we're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk with James about his own experience with podcasting. And then we're going to get a sneak peek into some literature.
Hey, I know what you're thinking. Right now might be a good time to go and get a quick break, but here's the thing. I'm thinking that you could also use this as a good opportunity to like, subscribe, and drop a comment on this video. It would help us. It would also get the search algorithms to make sure that this video pops up for more people. So we'd really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Thank you so much. Bye.
And we are back with James Tehrani. We're having a great time. We were talking about everything from Pink Floyd to picking up litter. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about now, James, is we talked about it before we went to record. You said, oh, this is going to be interesting because I'm not used to being the guest on a podcast. I'm used to hosting. I'm actually really curious. Like, you've done your fair share of podcasting. Be honest. What makes a good podcast? What makes a bad podcast?
I think a good podcast is anything anybody would want to listen to. I mean, just having fun and letting loose, letting your hair down a little. I think podcasts go wrong when they're too scripted, and I've worked with somebody who really wanted to script everything out that he said, and that's okay. I understand it. I understand that you want to get everything right, and being right is important to me as an editor. But there's something about being able to just kind of go on tangents and just kind of explore things and see what's out there and kind of try new things. So I think that's where podcasts go right, is when they're just kind of fun conversations where you're just having a conversation. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about Pink Floyd and litter. I mean, I don't think that's ever been done before. I think we're breaking new ground here. Pink Floyd, litter. I mean, come on.
And one thing that's really kind of interesting too, I think, with podcasting is that it really does kind of give a voice to everyone, right? And that's maybe something that is really unique that I like about the medium, is that you could probably find something for anybody. And whether or not that's Pink Floyd and litter or whatever the combination may be, everyone's kind of got their own different vantage point and ideas about that, right? But I guess one of the questions I would have for you is, with your experience as well, what are some of the most positive experiences or things that you've really seen from doing your own podcast that have really kind of crystallized or gave you that kind of aha moment, if you don't mind?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm a very shy person, and it takes a lot for me. I mean, like, even when I'm trying to call someone, I really have to force myself to do it because I'm a really reserved, shy person. But what I realized with podcasting is I could be somebody who I might not be. I could be more outgoing. I can kind of joke around. I can be try and be like this witty host and take and make my guests feel more comfortable by just talking to them. I mean, one time I did this podcast. Actually, we called it a video. So when you say podcast, is it a video? If it has video, is it a podcast? If it's just voice, I don't know. So let's say, for argument's sake, that since this had video and audio, it was still in the podcast genre. So he was a big card player, poker and blackjack and thing. He was I think he's a blackjack champion, if I'm remembering correctly. So during the podcast, I had a hand of cards, and I shuffled them, and we played blackjack as the podcast was going on. So I'd ask a question, and then I'd say, do you want to hit or do you want to stay? And it all worked out in the end, and he wound up busting me as the dealer because he's that good. But it's a way to kind of explore who you are in a way that you might not be comfortable with outside of podcasting. So it's an interesting medium, and it's a way. I mean, we were talking a little bit during the break. You and Ron, you were talking about how it's kind of like this time capsule. And when you said that, I was thinking back. I was like, if I had an opportunity to like sit down with my grandparents and just interview them for a podcast and just have that as like a memory, like I was really close with my grandmother, and she passed away 6 years ago, and
Mhm.
I saved like this. She always used to do this. Whenever she left me a message, she'd always say, "James, when you get a chance, this is your grandmother. Call me back." And I still hear that voice in my head, but I wanted to save it, and then I switched phones and I lost it.
Oh,
So I no longer have any real record of her voice. So what you were saying really resonated with me because 50 years from now, if somebody stumbles upon this podcast on the interwebs or whatever people are listening to podcasts in 50 years, technology is probably going to change, but it's a glimpse into what was. I mean, nobody knows what Abraham Lincoln's voice sounded like.
right.
I mean, there's
Well, and it,
writing about it, like he was supposed to be a high kind of squeaky thing, but who knows what it really
yeah.
sounded like.
Well, and it's funny. I had never thought about what you just mentioned and what Ron talked about during the break until we had a guest on last season, Adam Bernard, who has his own podcast, and his podcast is definitely a little bit more controversial than Ron is. Right? He really wants to get into social issues and politics and religion. And that's great. One of the things we asked him about, though, was, talk to us about that, and I thought it was actually really interesting. One of the things he commented on is he says, I want my children, my children's children, if they want, they can listen back to their grandfather or their father someday and see where I stood on these issues. He wants them to know that he was progressive in his mind, right? Like his interpretation about like what was right. And I had never given that any thought. I don't think I'd ever given any thought to. I don't have children, right? Of the three of us here, I'm the one who doesn't have any children. I never thought about the idea that a future Alex Stud Jr. I'm not would even want to listen to me. And I thought, wow, that is true. How this is unlike radio could live forever, right? Radio was at least historically, it was said one time, and if you didn't listen to it then, it's gone.
Yep, that's
I don't
true.
know. It's just crazy to think about. Ron or James, do you have any things to add to that?
I think you said it very succinctly. I think it's a way of connecting, and I think that's what podcast. You said, where do people go right? It's making a connection with your audience. Who wants to? I mean, like nobody knows me probably who's going to be listening to this, unless my family happens to chime in, but they'll get to know me from
Hi,
this.
Tehrani family.
They'll be too bored. They'll be like, "Oh, I don't want to listen to Dad again." But yeah, it's a way to meet people in a new, refreshing way. And like I said, technology is going to change. There's going to be something else in 10 years, and podcasting will maybe it'll keep going on. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah. Well, one thing, and I'm not sure if Ron and I have actually said this on the air. We've said it to a lot of our guests before we start, where we've talked about where Ron and I, in some ways, started this podcast just to connect as brothers, right? We're separated by 1,000 miles. And it was like, well, why don't we chat every week? And by the way, let's bring on a third party, someone we both, someone that either I know or he knows or both of us knows.
Mhm.
And let's just have a conversation. And it's interesting too, this podcast, I think, not to be mushy, but I think my relationship with my brother has gotten a lot better. And so the motivation for why people do podcasts are also so varied.
Right. I mean, just going back to my situation with my brother, I mean, we've always been close. but we've never worked together before. So it's interesting to see that side of him because I've never seen it firsthand, and he's much more driven and determined than I've ever been. So it's really fun to kind of ride his coattails.
Now, I have to ask. You said he's your twin.
Yes.
Is he an identical twin? Like, is there someone who looks exactly like you walking the streets?
We're fraternal, but we do look a lot alike. Especially when we were younger, we looked more alike than we do now. Like, I'd say until we were maybe freshman year, 8th grade and freshman year, we really could get away with kind of mixing and matching if we wanted to. We still confused a lot of people, but I think if you saw us now, you'd be able to tell us apart. Although,
are you
one
both...
story real quick.
Yeah.
When I got married, some people didn't know I had a twin brother, so he wound up getting a lot of congratulations. And
That's awesome.
Like, it's not me. But one more story, when I was in college, I just thought of this when I was saying that story. He came to my fraternity house. I went to the University of Missouri. He went to Colorado State. So he came up for one of our big parties. And a friend of mine saw him walking around, and he's like, "Oh, hey, James." And my brother kept walking because he wasn't James. And then the guy got really mad and then came up to him and said, "What the hell's wrong with you, James? Why are you ignoring me?" And he had to spend like 20 minutes convincing him that he wasn't James.
Wow. Well, so does your brother, does he live in the Chicagoland area? I guess my question is, am I going to be walking down the streets in the Loop someday?
No, he doesn't live in Chicago anymore. He's out west in Seattle.
Got it. Okay, that gives me peace of mind. I don't want to accidentally embarrass myself and be like that same guy. Yeah. So, listen, we do want to switch topics a little bit. We were talking about the medium known as podcasts. I want to talk about another medium known as books. Maybe we've all read a book once in our life, right? Books, literature. I understand you're actually in the process of writing. Can you talk about that?
I don't know what I can say about this. Just kidding. I've been working on a book for a little over 2 years now. I have advice to anybody who wants to write a book. Do not start with a complicated biography because it will drive you crazy. Start with a children's book where you can write maybe 6 or 7 paragraphs. Get some fancy illustrator to make some fun pictures of hippos dancing or whatever, and then be done with it. Do not start with a complicated biography.
That's what you did.
That's what I did. So I'm currently working on a book. So there was a show, it was actually short films, called The Little Rascals, or Our Gang, which was what it was really called back in the day. And there was one of the kids, his name... Oh, wait, got him here. There we go.
There you go.
Is that a bobblehead?
It is.
Oh, I love it. So for everyone here, or everyone who's not watching the video, it's a bobblehead. I don't want to spoil it, but it's Alfalfa.
Yes, so I'm doing a biography of Carl Alfalfa, or Alfie Switzer.
Like that, I remember you told me this when you were like walking out the door practically at Sphere when we were coworkers. And my immediate thought was of everyone in the world that you chose to do a biography of. Why Alfalfa?
So I get into this in the prologue of the book. So I remember being a kid in my grandparents' living room, or den, I should say, and my brother and I would watch Channel 32, which was WFLD. Now it's a Fox station. And in the afternoons, they would show the Little Rascals and the Three Stooges, and I think the Monkees were in there too. all these kind of old shows, even for when I was a kid, they were old. And I loved the Little Rascals. I thought they were great. And when I was working at a publication called Electronic Media, this was in the late 90s, I got a press release about an television network show that they were talking about Alfalfa. And I was reading the press release, and it talked about like his untimely death and things like that. And they had some choice words about him as well. And so I called the PR person. I said, "Can you send me a copy of this so I can see it?" And she sent me a VHS tape, and I still have
Wow.
it somewhere. And I watched
For
it,
for
and
the young people listening, VHS tapes it's like what before DVDs were. And for those who don't know what a DVD is, it's like what Netflix used to be.
So some kind of streaming video? Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Exactly like that.
Okay.
Something like that. And so I watched the special, and they made him out to be this pretty much terrible person, and I was like shocked. How could this sweet little innocent kid be like this bully? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like the bully in the R gang, or the most famous bully, is Butch, but he was supposed to be the nicest person off camera. On the other hand, Alfalfa was supposed to be one of the heroes, and he could do some things that were not so nice off camera. But I don't look at him as a bad guy by any means. So anyways, at that time I started doing more research because I was curious, and I was like, well, let me start out and let me go get a book on him. And I couldn't find one. I'm like, how could there not be a book about this? This is an interesting life. And I was like, I should do a book on that. And then after that, shortly after, I put it off, had kids, and didn't think about it until a couple of years ago, and I decided to sit down during COVID, or actually, it was a little before COVID, now that I'm thinking about it. And I said, you know what? It's time to write a book. Let's see what I can find out about Carl Switzer. And it's turned into this crazy adventure, and I'm not done yet, still working on it. I'm still finding like crazy stuff. Like I found this video the other day of him talking to Mussolini's son.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, so Hal Roach, who was the head of the studio, the Hal Roach Studios, he wanted to start a studio with Mussolini and his son, so he flew Mussolini's son to Hollywood, and they had a big party for him. And then why not meet the R Gang kids? So there's this little video of, I guess Alfie must have been about 10 at the time, 9 or 10, talking to Mussolini's son and saying, you could tell like somebody was trying to feed him lines, and he was like smiling. He's like, if I go to your country, can I make movies with you? And then Spanky comes in. Spanky was another kid in the gang, and he's like, if Alfalfa goes to your country, can I make movies with you too? And it's the cutest little thing. It's like, that's the beauty of the R Gang Little Rascals series, is it was kids being kids during the Great Depression. I mean, yes, it started before the Great Depression, but most people don't know the silent versions. But the cast that most people know, like with Alfie and Spanky and Buckwheat and Darla, they were in the 30s, and times were tough, and these were real kids. These weren't like stage kids who were trained. That's the beauty of the series, and that's why they are so endearing, and why people still watch their movies all these years later.
Wow.
That's going to
There's
be
a lot
an
to
awesome.
unpack.
Yeah. That's going to be awesome, and congratulations.
That's the tip of the iceberg, let me tell you.
So
Well,
I
like,
do have
one story.
one question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I feel like I've heard this rumor that a lot of the cast were like owned by the studio, like they were just mass adopted so that they could get around some child labor laws. Is there any validity to that, or is that completely just pure BS that somehow has made its way to the internet?
That would be pure BS that's made its way to the internet.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
That sounds like something that would happen in early Hollywood, though. Like they're all like indentured servants.
Right, like, oh, they're my kids. They're part of this. Don't worry.
One thing that people don't realize is that, well, he's famous for the Little Rascals. He was in at least 1 or 2 films every year from the time he was in our gang, 1935, till his death. His last film came out in 58, and he died in January of 59. So he was in lots of movies. He was in A Wonderful Life.
And
Really?
that blew my mind.
I didn't know that.
When I was hearing this, right, when James told me he was leaving and he told me about this book, I immediately went on Wikipedia and looked this guy up. And he had a small role in It's a Wonderful Life. And if I remember correctly, wasn't he the guy that pulled the lever that separated the pool during that dance scene early in the movie?
Yeah, there's this creepy kid that like comes up to Alfie because he's upset because he went on a date with Donna Reed, and obviously he didn't wind up with Donna Reed.
Key.
And then there's this like kid who's like almost like a devil. This key will open the pool, and then he's like, "I'll do it," and then he turns the thing, and the whole pool opens. But lo and behold, everybody loves being in the pool. Who knew?
And it's crazy to think that. I mean, that I see that movie every winter, every Christmas. So I watch Alfie every year. I had no idea he was in that movie.
Most people don't. I mean, he's in there for maybe, I don't even know if it's 5 minutes, and he doesn't really look like Alfie. I mean, he does to me now because I've seen so many of his movies past our gang, but like when I first saw the movie, I had no clue. He was in he did a couple movies like with John Wayne. He was in The Defiant Ones, which is an amazing movie. That was his last film.
Well, you'd mentioned that he died in 59. I think it's safe to say he had a pretty premature death. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, he died at the age of 31 from a gunshot wound.
And, for those who have never heard this story, and I only know very briefly based on a quick Wikipedia search, because there's no book about this, aka I'm waiting for your book to come out, James. There was a fight about money or something, right? There was a conflict. Something happened.
There's a story that's been around forever. Whether or not it's true, I'm not 100% sure. I've heard other things that I can't corroborate because I don't have a second source on it. But what I heard is probably more realistic than what everybody says happened. But the basic story is, so he was a hunter. He was a bear hunter, and he also trained dogs to make a living because he wasn't getting those juicy rolls. So he
sold a dog to Jimmy Stewart.
Really? I didn't know that.
I saw that on Wikipedia. That might have been made up. It was on Wikipedia, but I saw it.
That's possible. I wasn't aware of that one.
Anyway.
See, you taught me something here.
I just read the Wikipedia page, but keep going. I'm sorry.
So he had a partner, a guy he knew, and this is how the story goes, that he borrowed the guy's dog for a hunting trip, and then the dog runs away. Guy gets really mad. His name was Moses Bud Stilts, and he tells Alfie, "You better find my dog." So Alfie puts an ad in the newspaper. Apparently, I've looked for this ad. I have not been able to find it. But this is the story that's been told since 1959. And says, looking for this lost hunting dog, blah, blah, blah. Lo and behold, shortly after, the guy turns up with the dog. And Alfie pays him a $35 reward. Excuse me. And so he pays him the $35 reward. buys him $15 worth of drinks. And just think about that for a moment. $15 worth of drinks in 1959.
It's a
The
lot of
average
booze.
drink was probably 75 cents to a dollar. So he supposedly bought this guy 15 drinks. That's a lot of drinks. Anyways, so
Wow.
he gets the dog back, and then he buys this guy drinks, and then a couple weeks later he's out with this guy, and they're drinking and they're having a good time and
The
healthy.
same guy or someone else?
No, this is a different guy. Decides I want to go back to this other guy's house, Bud Stilts, because he should pay me the $50. And then from there, he goes, gets in the house, and there's a big fight, and Bud Stilts shoots him in the stomach, and he dies about a half hour later.
Over $50. Which, to be fair, that's like what, $1,000 today? $500?
Yeah,
I don't
something
know.
like that. I mean, it's
but not. I mean,
Not worth
that's
your
a pretty,
life.
that's a pretty sad way to go.
it is, and I mean, there's a lot of things that don't make sense about that story, and I'm not going to be able to solve this mystery because there's a lot of firsthand information that just isn't available anymore. But there are some clues on what might have happened that I get into in the book, and I think it's a really interesting tale.
Now, James, am I right in saying this? You were able to speak with some people who either knew him directly or indirectly, correct?
Yeah, so I've talked to some really cool sources. Like, I found this one guy in Ohio who, when I talked to him, he was 95. This was about 2 years ago. His dad, his mom had taken him to the R Gang studios, or the Hell Roach Studios, in the mid 30s, and I found an article about it. So I looked him up and I found the guy and I called him up, and his memory of the events weren't great, but he just had this warm personality, and it was the first interview I've ever done where I heard like this voice in the background, and I was like, "Is that your wife?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's my wife." And so I interviewed both of them, which was kind of cool. And so I talked to him, and I talked to there's a there's a few people who are still alive who are actually in the series. So I've talked to some of them, which was like the Woim, who was one of the main bad guys in the series. I got to talk to him when I was in California a couple of years ago. I didn't know it at the time, but I had a really bad case of the flu, and I wonder now if it was COVID. But so this was January of 2020 when I talked to him. But it was over the
Wow.
phone, so he was never in danger.
That's good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've talked to a bunch of the children. Like I've become friendly with Darla's daughter. I talked to her. I've talked to Spanky's daughter. I've
That's
talked to
so cool.
Waldo's
Yeah.
son. Unfortunately, I have not been able to track down Alfalfa's one child. He's very hard to find. He's kind of off the radar, and he was just a few years old when his father died. So I don't know how much memories he would really have.
So I have two questions. One,
Just two?
I know you. Just two. Just two. Until I read the book, which that's my first question. I know. Listen, you are a writer, and if I know anything about George R. Martin when it comes to setting a date, things can get delayed. Game of Thrones writer, for those listening. When do you anticipate this book being published or being available for consumption?
That's the big question. I really thought I'd be done with my research by now, but I'm not. My goal is to have a draft done by the end of the year, and then if there's any agents out there who are interested in this kind of thing, hit me up, as the kids say. I mean, I'd love for this to come out next year, so that's my goal.
Wow. Well, we will definitely keep the audience aware of as this gets released and the timing of it all. We would love to have you back on when the time does come, because I think this is intriguing, and I don't know anything about this guy other than a Wikipedia search and what you've told me. And I'm hooked, and I don't think I'm the only one. So
It's crazy
I'm
how many fans he still has. Because like somebody did a video about his life a year or so ago, and it got like 4 million views on YouTube. So you think
uh,
like this is a kid who lived till 19, well, he wasn't a kid when he died, but he lived till 1959. His years of being a star were basically 1935 to 1940. That's 5 years, but he's still making an impact
mm,
all these years later. Like people still watch the shows, the episodes. They still laugh at these kids. It's crazy how many people are really interested in that, and some people will be like, "Well, who would be interested?" There's lots of people who are interested.
count me as one of them now. And then my final question is, you're gonna hate me, James. I don't think I've ever actually seen a single episode of the original Little Rascals. My experience, I grew up, I was born in 91. Hope I don't make either one of you feel old, but I was born in 1991. And I remember watching many times the movie that was made in the early 90s, where, they did the remake. Donald Trump, I remember, has a cameo in it. I think Whoopi Goldberg does too.
Mel
Is
Brooks, yeah.
that movie, like, can you watch that movie? Is that just like, this is trash, or does it actually pay homage and it's actually legitimate in terms
I
of
think
its
people
representation?
my age have different views on that movie than people your age because I know younger people love it. I mean, there's some things in it that are okay, and I haven't watched it recently. It's been years since I saw it, but it didn't connect with me the way the old Our Gang shows did. But there's nothing wrong with it.
Because if it wasn't for that movie, and again, I don't mean to sound young, but if I didn't know that movie, I don't think I would really know the Little Rascals. Like, that's my connection to the Little Rascals. Like,
Well, when I
Ron,
was growing up, there was maybe like 4 or 5 channels. You didn't have many choices, and if there was something on that was funny, you gravitated toward that, and that was one of the things after school that was on every day. And it's actually
what about you?
So, yeah, admittedly, I think my daughter actually watched that movie the other day. Like, I want to say maybe 1 or
The
2
early
weeks ago.
90s one.
Yeah. And, yeah, I did point out the Donald Trump. I was like, there's Trump out there. But she seemed to like it, but I don't think, I think she's seen it probably once or twice now. But I don't think it's, like, really high on her, like, rotation list of movies. But I think there is just something that's sort of timeless about kids getting together and doing their antics, and that's always fun. And I don't think you really see that so much in a lot of TV shows now, especially when you've got a huge ensemble cast like they had, right? That's it. There's just, I think, in the logistics side of that is it's very difficult, especially when you're working with child actors, to really kind of rein all that in, because it can turn very chaotic, I'm sure, very quickly. As I'm sure in your research, you probably heard some probably interesting stories about what it was like for the cast.
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually really interesting. This might sound a little bit morbid, and I apologize for that, but when all this was going down on his final day, it was in the evening in January of 1959, and at that time, the Little Rascals were one of the biggest things on television because most of the shorts were made in the 30s, but they were re-released on television in the mid 50s, and actually they were on prime time at that time. So as all
Wow.
this was going on, they were showing Little Rascals on TV, and people
Hmm.
were watching while all this craziness was going on at the Stilts residence.
So is it fair to say he sort of had a renaissance in terms of his career because all of a sudden his work from 15 years previously or 20 years earlier was getting primetime television?
Unfortunately, all of these kids signed contracts in the 30s that did not grant them residuals. So
Oh.
nobody knew about television. Well, they knew about television, but nobody knew that television was going to be a thing. So they got nothing from all of the time that they were on television in the 50s and to today. I mean, nobody made any money off of it except for the studios.
Wow. Well, that kind of ties into what you were talking about. You weren't quite accurate, but there's still some screwing over these kids.
Yeah, the studio did own them in that way, but
Well, honestly, this has been a really interesting conversation, James. It's been a real delight having you on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, when we publish this, for anyone listening, we're going to link to your brother's company, and we're going to keep the listeners up to date on updates about your book. And as James had mentioned, if there's anyone listening who knows someone who's a publisher, get in touch with the Between Two Studs. We'll get you in touch with James.
All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, thank
Anytime.
you so much.
Thank you.
We look forward to having you back on when the book's released.
Sounds great.